Hello everyone, welcome to our video of Introduction of Language Universal and Language Typology. Before we get into both of these terms, let's look at some language examples. First, look at these sentences. The three sentences here are expressing two very simple ideas. These ideas here can be expressed in English or in many other languages. So, to explore the topics of language universal and language typology, let's first observe some language data from 6 languages, including English. They are all expressing the same idea. So, here are the two important questions we'll discuss. What do these languages have in common? And how do you classify these languages? These two questions are extremely broad and complicated, but let's take some simple steps to approach them. Don't worry if you don't know all these languages. We'll go through them together. For now, let's just take a simple first look at them and see what you notice. A simple observation we may have made is that all these examples you see are in their written forms. We know that each of these languages have their own spoken and written systems. And within their written systems, some of them use the Roman alphabet system and some of them don't. Therefore, we could classify these languages according to what written systems they use. That's one way of classifying them. If you know more than one or two of these languages, you may also come to the conclusion that these languages all have verbs, subjects, and objects in their sentences. Yes, this is a syntax feature that they all have in common. Within this feature, you notice that some of these languages order these elements differently than the others. For the first sentence in each of these language examples, I have marked their subjects in purple, verbs in green or yellow, and objects in orange. What did you notice? You probably noticed that some of the languages have their verbs in between their subjects and objects, but some of them have the verbs at the very end of the sentence. Therefore, another way of categorizing these languages could be whether they are SVO languages or SOV languages. As all the other spoken forms of languages, we may also notice that all these languages contain consonants and vowels in their spoken sounds. But each languages have different ways of combining these consonants and vowels. So we can also classify them by syllable structures, such as how many and which consonants are allowed in the coda position, and what could be their positions relative to the vowel. If we look at how consonants and vowels form syllables in these languages, you notice that each language has their own unique sequence constraints. On this slide, I have provided a simplified version of these constraints. You may notice that some of these languages allow a maximum of 2 consonants in the onset position, and the second consonant has to be a glide, such as Spanish and Korean. You may also notice that Japanese and Chinese only allow a nasal consonant to be in the coda position, and otherwise their syllable always ends with a vowel. I also want to point out that the syllable structure for English and for French do look similar, but the actual distribution of syllable structure varies a lot across these two languages. For example, French syllables have a much higher tendency to end with a vowel, even though they allow a maximum of 4 consonants in the coda position. But in English, it's a lot more common to end a syllable with a consonant or a consonant cluster. There are even more ways of classifying languages. For example, we can categorize the languages according to whether the language's noun system have gender distinctions, or how often these languages appear in anime. No, that was a joke. So, by looking at these 6 languages, we see many ways of describing what they have in common and what categories they fall into. So, what about other languages? Linguists are curious about what all languages have in common and how to categorize them. They have found some interesting universalities among languages that have been adequately described. For example, phonologically speaking, all languages have at least 3 vowels. If a language has only 3 vowels, they must include a high front unrounded vowel, a low vowel, and a high back rounded or unrounded vowel in their phoneme inventory. Also, in terms of syntactic word orders, there's an overwhelming tendency for the subject of a sentence in a language to precede the direct object. There are also very interesting ways of seeing what languages have in common in terms of meaning. It may be easy to find straightforward translations across language for a very common and concrete object, but sometimes it could be very difficult to translate a specific abstract concept from one language to another. An interesting example of semantic universal is how different languages describe colors. It seems like non-industrialized cultures typically have far fewer words for colors than industrialized cultures. According to studies by two linguists in the 1990s, all cultures have at least two basic opposing terms for black and white. And if a culture has three colors, the third is red. So here's our second question. How do we classify all the languages? We have tried some approaches to classify the 6 language examples we've seen, but is there a way to classify all languages in the world? Some of you may think we could classify them by their language family, or we may classify them by whether their verbs are before or after the object. Or we can find many other different ways of classifying any structural features they share or differ, such as which sounds could begin or end a word in a language. So coming back to our two main questions we've been discussing. The first question, what do languages have in common, is concerned with our topic, language universal. Language universals highlight the unity underlying the variety of language found in the world. It is invaluable to our understanding of the brain of language acquisition and of the principles governing our communication in all cultures. Think about the over 7,000 languages humans have developed over the course of history. If one could find a basic principle that governs all languages, they're likely to be the result of a cognitive and social skills that enable human beings to develop the ability to speak in the first place. The second question, how can we classify languages, is concerned with our topic, language typology. The study of typology aims to catalog languages according to types, such as the ones we've seen in the examples at the beginning of this video. Uncovering language universals and classifying languages into types are complementary tasks. Since little or nothing is known about the structure of thousands of languages, universal principles can be proposed only as tentative hypotheses based on the language for which descriptions are available. It is usually described as a tendency. And categories of language types can only be established according to very specific criteria. The world's languages are so diverse in so many ways, there isn't an overall typological classification for all the languages, even within a single level of structure such as syntax or phonology.